This is Professor Angela Upchurch, and this video is designed to help my Torts students prepare for Torts class. In this video, I will be covering a few tips for case reading, case briefing, and general class preparation. You'll be hearing a lot about these concepts throughout the first few weeks of law school and through orientation. Please note that it's okay that you'll hear some slight different variations of approach here, that what I'd like you to do is just consider the different perspectives that you hear from and realize that there are multiple ways to go about case briefing and case reading. My goal here is really just to give you some suggestions of how to best prepare for torts. There's a resource that you might find helpful, and many of the tips I'm going to give you today came from this tool, and that is Reading Like a Lawyer by Ruth Ann McKinney. I have a copy that if you'd like to look at, you may just see me. In general, there are 4 tips I'd like to give you as you're preparing for class. First, make sure you preview the entire assignment before reading. I'll talk about this step and the others in more detail in a moment, but this is the first main step. The second is to do the same at the case level, preview the actual case. And the third is to skim the case and mark sections for a future deeper read. Finally, and this is where you spend the bulk of your time, is reading and rereading those sections you've marked. So the first step, preview the assignment. Now you may wonder why this is a suggested step. Law textbooks, unlike undergraduate textbooks or textbooks in other graduate areas of study, are not designed to give you content directly. So there are sections where the author writes sort of an explanation of the law, but for the most part, your casebook and torts, and in many of your classes, is really a collection of cases, and you are required to read through the case to understand the content, or what does the law actually say. So it means that you're going to need to use your textbook much more purposefully than maybe you did in undergrad. So some of these things might seem obvious, and to the extent they are, you're probably very well suited to start your first few days here. But if not, I'd like to encourage you to think about a few of these things. First, use your casebook for context. There are chapter headings and subsection headings that are designed to give you clues as to what the material is designed to teach you. So let's take the first assignment. If you look at page 587, the chapter is chapter 9, and it starts with the phrase battery, assault, and false imprisonment. So the first thing you'd want to do is figure out what does each word in this phrase actually mean. You may have some understanding of these concepts prior to coming to law school, but it's critically important for you to understand the legal meaning. So you should be prepared to look up these words in a Black's Law dictionary. The other thing you want to consider is why they're grouped together. So I'll tell you right off the bat, these are intentional torts. If you look at both the original section of the book they're in, the section is intentional torts. My syllabus also indicates that this is an intentional tort. But these aren't all the intentional torts. So why are they grouped together? Just something for you to think about, and as you go back and review this content later in the course to help yourself when you outline. What is common about these terms? What is different about these terms? That will actually help you with the question of why they're grouped together. Still at the previewing level, you want to skim through the notes. Now, generally, I found in the past that students make the mistake at the beginning of law school thinking that the notes are sort of the afterthought, that they spend most of their time focused on reading the case and very little time to the actual notes and questions at the end of the assignment. Now, I can tell you for our torts book that the notes and questions are critically important. They tell you a lot about what the reading is supposed to be about. They also actually teach some content that is not covered in the cases at all. So if you miss the notes, you will be in trouble. So one thing to think about when you're just skimming through the notes, you're not reading them at this point, but you're trying to figure out what they tell you about the assignment. First, you want to think about whether or not there are notes after every single case, or whether the cases are grouped together and the notes appear at the end. The reason I suggest you consider this is when cases are grouped together, it generally means that they're all covering the same point of law and that you're using them together as a comparison. So you need to think of them as a group, and the notes kind of indicate that even before you read them. The other thing you want to get when you're skimming through the notes are whether there's any concepts that you see highlighted in the notes. You'll see that there's several common words as you're scanning through the notes in our section here. So let's look at a preview of the first assignment's notes and subheadings. If you look at page 592 to 597, you'll see the notes. There are two cases here grouped together with notes, which means that these two cases deal with generally the same point of law. They follow the heading, A, battery, and 1, harmful or offensive touching. That means that these cases will help us understand what that term, battery, and specifically harmful or offensive touching, means. If you also scan through the notes, you'll see those concepts, contact, touching, harmful, and offensive, appear in the italicized intro to the notes. So we previewed the assignment with our goal of setting ourselves up for a successful read. Now we need to preview the case. The reason you do this before you actually read the case is it helps set yourself up to figure out what's important about the case. Reading a case is not like reading a novel where the ending is a surprise. You really want to understand what you're looking at, why you're reading this case, and what you need to get out of it even before you read it. So let's talk about previewing the actual case. The first thing you need to do is look at the case context. What is the case name? What court issued this decision? And when was the case decided? So for example, if the case is fairly outdated, it might be assigned for historical perspective. For example, you might be comparing the state of the law now with the state of the law prior to recent changes. If there are multiple cases from the same court, it might show a change in the law. So in torts, most of the cases that we read are from a variety of different state courts, and they're really designed to give you a basic understanding of tort law across the country. But sometimes we'll look at the same concept going through a particular court because that's where the law really evolved. So for example, in products liability, the concept of strict liability in products came from the California State Supreme Court. And so you'll see several cases all from that court in a row, and it's intentional to show the evolution of the law in that area. Sometimes you'll read opinions from the same judge, so you'll start seeing some common names throughout law school. When you see that judge come up again, you want to make sure you make note of it. In addition, when you're previewing the case, you want to look at the first few paragraphs of the case. What you're doing here is kind of setting yourself up to understand the big picture of the case before you read it. Who are the parties? What brought them to the court? What are the underlying dispute here? What issues are being decided in this opinion? This helps you figure out what you're looking for. And third, skim to find out the holding and the disposition of the case. As I mentioned before, you shouldn't read the opinion without knowing what direction the court's going to ultimately take. That doesn't set yourself up to do well. You want to know what you're looking for and then go and make a focused read. So now we're on to our third main step, skimming the case and marking sections for deeper read. This is the first time you're making a large read of the case, but you're not taking a lot of time to make it through the case because you're going to come back and do a deeper read of the important sections. Your main objective here is to understand the case at a large, big picture level and to mark out those sections that need a deeper read, which principally for you right now should be the rules of law, and you find those like where the court is citing code, which is not very often in tort class, or citing to other cases, stating statements of law. That's typical that you'll find in torts. The other thing you're looking for is the basic application of the rules to the facts, because you want to mark those sections to reread them and truly understand that application. Which brings us to our last big point. Now you go and read and reread those marked sections. This actually is the most time-consuming part of class preparation. So be prepared to read sometimes the same 10 pages 3 or 4 times. When you do your read and reread, what I want you to do is take notes as you go through these sections. These notes can become your case brief. It's critical to take notes because it helps you and your short-term memory not get so taxed as you're reading. You want to make sure that you offset important sections either by notes or colored highlighter or something that helps you trigger your memory and also alerts you to that section so that when you're in class you know where to find answers. It's very helpful to visualize the case. So what you want to do is either diagram the process or the events. If you like to make pictures, you can do that. You can do a flow chart. Your case brief really is essentially a kind of specific form of note-taking, really. I would like you to keep the rules of law as stated by the court. Rules of law are terms of art, and I don't want you to change the rules of law into your own words. And so, for example, in this first unit, the rules of law focus on the law of battery. So when you see the rules of battery stated, keep them as the court states them. Use the same words. But the court's actual application, their reasoning through those rules as they're applying it to the facts in the case can and should be restated by you. So for example, if there's a very long passage that the court describes the application of the facts to the rule, you should try and rewrite that in your own words. And check your summaries for accuracy by reading and rereading your restatements and using study group members to assist you. As far as case briefing goes, there are a lot of different approaches, and I don't have a specific template I require you to use. But let me give you a few things that I want to make sure you walk away with when you're done with your case brief so that you're prepared for class. Make sure that you have the issues stated, and I would strongly encourage you to break up multiple issues into separate sections in your case brief. So for example, if there are 2 issues, you'd want to state them separately like this, where you've got a paragraph that deals with issue 1, the rule that addresses that issue, and then the summary of the court's application of that issue, and then move on to the second issue. Now sometimes you'll find an opinion that's written just like this where they break it up. Other times the court will do one big paragraph of issues, one big paragraph of all the rules you need, and one big paragraph of application. Do not do that in your case brief. It will make it difficult for you to follow the understanding, and you'll have trouble in class. More importantly, when you get to outlining, this will help you set up with your outline. Make sure you have the rules, and as I mentioned before, use the court's actual language. You can star it in your casebook, write in your case brief the page it's on so you can easily reference it, but that I want the actual court's language. Make sure that you have the court's analysis. You can try to summarize this, and I encourage you to do so. Make sure you indicate where you find the reasoning in the opinion. If by chance your summary is inaccurate, you want to make sure that you can tell me when we're in class where you're reading this so I can help straighten out the reading by the court of the court's opinion. You should also make sure you understand the court's holding and the ultimate disposition in the case. As I mentioned before, the notes and questions in this casebook are critical, and you should integrate those into your case brief or your case notes. So make sure that you don't just skim those. They actually are describing rules of law, sometimes for the very first time. They're not always discussed in the cases, and you need to understand those when you come to class. And finally, our takeaway point. By preparing well and previewing your reading before you read, you should be able to determine the purpose for these cases, the reason why they were assigned, the reason why your casebook author grouped them as he did before you get to class. That's one of the important takeaways we'll also have at the end of class. You know, what was the content to be learned from these cases? What does it tell us about tort law? And then what does that mean for the next issue and the next class? So hopefully this provided you with some easy steps as you're beginning to prepare for law school. Realize this is a process. It's a skill you're learning in addition to the actual rule of law, and so it takes a little while to learn it. If you're struggling at all, please don't hesitate to see me, and I look forward to meeting you in class.